Inside the Birds is back. What's going on, everybody? It is Geoff Mosher and Adam Caplan, joined by InsideTheBirds.com's Andrew DiCecco for another great annual 53-man roster projection episode, of course, presented by our friends at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. It is the exclusive Jersey Shore resort of Inside the Birds. Fellas, welcome to the annual show. This is like one of our favorite annuals, along with our mock draft that we do right before the draft and some other ones. Now, I like this one more than some of our other 53-man roster projection shows because this is literally, it's happening in real time. I mean, cuts could be making as people listen to this. This is not one of those too early ones that we do, you know, right after the draft. And then all of a sudden the team signs Mekhi Becton and you're like, oh, I wasn't planning that one happening. So this is great. It's fun. And I want to start off with both of you on this, Andrew and Adam. I found when just doing my own personal 53-man roster projection that this was not as complex as some past years where you had a lot of different positions. I felt like there was about 55 or 56 guys who could make it. And it was just trying to figure out that either that last offensive lineman or tight end or safety. Those really like the kind of positions where, you know, if things go the way I think and we think they're going to go, really, that's just that little dance that you have to make compared to, Adam, other years where there were a lot more positions where you were uncertain about, like running back, they would keep four.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think one year they kept five. This one was a little easier, I thought.
Yeah, I would agree. In fact, I remember either last year or the year before, I remember being almost painful, like, oh man, these last 5 spots, I can't imagine what it's like to sit in the room with the general manager and personnel director and the coaches decide who's going to make it or not. But I didn't feel like this was super tough. There were 2 or 3 players where it could go either way.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, yeah, I think what happened, and Andrew, who's at every practice, could attest to this, players pretty much play themselves off the roster. No team's perfect. You're not going to get them all right. Teams make mistakes. But in the end, Andrew, I would say when you look at it, was it really, really difficult?
I spent a lot of time deliberating over the final few spots, looking at wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, safety, corner depth. And you could even make a case for a defensive tackle. I mean, you just have to kind of read between the lines, listen to what the coaches say when you hear them at the podium in the case of Vic Fangio, and then really base it off what you see throughout the summer. You know, I think 16 practices, 3 preseason games, OTAs, and minicamp are a really good gauge as to where the roster is and where these players are. So I feel pretty good about it. Obviously, mine is available on InsideTheBirds.com. It was published at 9 a.m. Sunday morning. So feel free to take a look at it and read it out.
So this is where we have to mention Andrew has a lot at stake this year because I believe he's the reigning Eagles beat reporter champion on 53-man roster projection score. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's called the King of the Beats. Yeah.
Nice. So you were, I would say I don't know what you would call this in WWE, Adam, when someone comes out of nowhere to like win it all. But I feel like Andrew last year took the Beats by storm by by becoming the King of the Beats. And now you've got to defend your title.
I have to grade everybody's now. So they all had to send them to me. And now I have to kind of assess it.
Wait, that's the reward for winning? Is that you have to be the one that grades?
They said heavy is the head who wears the crown.
Fair. That's
there you
fair,
go.
I guess.
There you go.
All right. Before we get into our actual projections, I want to go through a few things from the preseason game and just a few items before we kind of get into everything. So for the preseason game on Saturday against the Vikings, obviously a lot of the offensive players sat, pretty much the starting offense sat in that game. Defense, I was not surprised to see Cooper DeJean play. I was not surprised to see him play nickel. We'll get to that a little bit. He said he needed reps. They knew he needed reps. He expected to play. He did play. He played in the position he's practiced at the most. So all of that made sense. But Nolan Smith to play that much in a final preseason game, and Andrew and I had a conversation about this, Adam, and I think it's a really, I don't know what you question more, Nolan Smith playing in the final preseason game, or not question what you're concerned about more, that or the fact that he, among third stringers, didn't look like a guy who's dominating out there. I mean, he looked like he belonged in that game, which you're not supposed to look like if you're a first round pick.
Well, he is a backup, and this was like a game for just backups. And the third preseason game is not like it used to be where when we had 4 preseason games, this was the dress rehearsal. It's no longer the dress rehearsal for most teams. Some teams played starters, most of them didn't. But yeah, look.
In fairness, though, some backups did not play in this game. Like key backups did not play.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So
yeah,
that
no,
shows
I
you
get
that
it.
he is
Some
not.
did it, some didn't.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
some did and some. But what I want to say with and this plays to my point that I'm going to say here is that I don't know how much Nolan Smith is. You know, we went into training camp thinking he's the clear third edge rusher. He might wind up being that. And we know BG's going to have his role. I just look at it and go, okay, of all the guys who are in there, and then he left and came back. That was weird too.
And he was on the kickoff team as well.
Yeah. So you have to ask yourself, what's the reasoning for it? And B, is he going to play as much as we thought he would, or should be? And was he really earned it? Because the thing with him is like he's done well against the twos in practice. When he subs in against the ones, he hasn't really done much. So, and we also saw that against Baltimore. But in fact, Baltimore, he had the open sack where he just ran and hit the quarterback, but he did not have he just didn't have a great game against Baltimore.
Right.
So I look, we're expecting him to have a nice role this season. At least we thought we were. And now I'm questioning exactly what his snap count's going to look like game in and game out.
Well, I love that you bring it up. And Andrew, I think, maybe something that we talk about as far as writing a story over the next week and a half before the season opener. And this is something I've raised on the podcast before. Normally with the Eagles around this time, because of what they invest in the trenches and the veteran that they usually have, right? You know what the 4-man rush line is going to look like when the season opener starts. Right now, I'm not sure. And usually with the Eagles, you kind of know what the second string 4-man rush line is going to be, or who might come out and who might come in. You might see similar faces. But as we sit here today, there's we won't answer the question because that's for a later pod. But I think that is sort of when we do what are the most pertinent questions about the Eagles going into the season. The 4-man rush and who composes it is certainly one of the biggest topics for this team.
Yeah, Nolan Smith is somebody, Geoff, that really he was very sporadic in his production throughout the summer. You saw him, like Adam said, he would flash against guys like Fred Johnson, Darian Kennard, but against obviously Lane Johnson. But Bryce Huff really wasn't able to get anything going against Lane Johnson either. That's what Lane Johnson's the best in the business. But even in game situations, you just don't see the flash, the explosiveness. I think he struggles at the point of attack, being able to disengage from blocks. But he says all the right things. He is noticeably bigger, and you hope that maybe with some reps, maybe that was the plan to get him more reps. He hasn't played a lot of football. He played just 16% of the snaps last season. Maybe that'll help him. I'm not sure, but when you see guys like Patrick Johnson and Julian Okwara and even Terrell Lewis to a degree be able to manufacture pressure and no one can't, well, I mean, that deserves to be discussed.
Yeah, no doubt about it. On the other side with Cooper DeJean, it was good to see him get out there. Good to see him get reps. Played the nickel. I thought he looked active. I know there were a couple of times he trailed an offensive player, but you did notice this is something Vic Fangio likes to do. He'll put out in nickel his 4-man front, but he'll use a nickel defender like DeJean and creep him up toward like run blitzing
box
out of nickel, right? You don't have your 5-man front. It might be second and third down and 5, right? So you want to have your nickel package out there, but the offense still might run in that spot. So you want to be able to have good run defenders too. So even with your 4-man front, you can sneak either a safety or a nickel down there at the last second to be that extra defender in the box. And he looked like he knew what he was doing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, he definitely did look, at least in coverage to my eye, a player that still needs to shake off some rust, which is to be expected when you miss 3 weeks, 3 critical weeks as a rookie. You're working your way back. He wasn't fully cleared until, I guess, last week. And this is his first game action. But I thought there were some good plays that he had, but I also thought in coverage there were plays where he allowed too much space. Guys were getting, that particular play that he got lucky against Lucky Johnson in the end zone there was something that I definitely noted early on.
The one thing I'll add here is because he's just back from the hamstring injury where he missed a lot of time, particularly the start of training camp, where you start installing stuff and you start getting guys involved. He's trying to make up for lost time. And sure, he could be a nickel defender, which is probably going to be his role this season. But the other thing is, and Andrew, as you brought this up, how much could he really handle mentally? Because he's kind of trying to make up for stuff that he missed. So it's not going to be easy. He's going to actually have to learn on the run here. He just hasn't had a lot of time. That's why it was imperative that he played in this game.
Absolutely. All right. Lucky Johnson, by the way, just became my third favorite NFL name behind Rashad Wild Goose and Storm Duck. So now we got Lucky Johnson. I like
Storm
that.
Duck.
Storm Duck. There's a Storm Duck.
Never heard of him. Storm
Yeah.
Johnson I've heard of, not Storm
No,
Duck.
no, there is a Storm Duck.
Yeah, no,
Is there
there
a Storm
is.
Duck? What teams he play for? I never heard of this.
Well, I don't know. Depending on when you're listening to this, it might not.
Oh
be.
yeah, well he was. Yeah, exactly.
I think he went to Louisville. He was drafted by or signed by the Dolphins. So
Okay.
we'll see how if Storm Duck can make it.
Gotcha.
All right. As far as the NFL schedule, rosters will go to 53. They're at 90. They'll go to 53 by 4 o'clock tomorrow. That's Tuesday. 4 o'clock Tuesday. Everybody has to be at 53. And then the waiver claims run until noon on Wednesday. So that is when you'll start to hear of who got claimed and things like that. Now the practice squad. Adam and I have been talking about this on the podcast. We wanted to get the official, protocol for that, Adam. So it is now, it's 16 players, right? Plus 1 international exemption.
Yes, the first time.
Vakalaki, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So they announced this last year that 2024 would be the first year that you could have 17, but it's got to be that 17th would be an international player. It's the first year that they're doing that. And then usually around 1 Eastern, because they've had the same timeline for years, on Wednesday is when you can fill out your practice squad. And yes, we're back with six men could be veterans. And that's really important that you can do that, because there's some guys like Nick Gates, if he doesn't make the Eagles 53-man roster, guys like that who
Brett Toth,
right? Depending on, he is vested, by the way, despite the little that he's played. Guys like that have a value because of their versatility, and some teams will say, you know what, we'd rather have them on our practice squad where we can just call them up when we need them.
Right. So that's really interesting. I think the Eagles have not manipulated in a bad way, manipulated in a good way, the use of their practice squad. Everybody remembers that at this time last year or a week later, they actually went into the regular season with no punters on the 53, signed Aaron Sipos to the practice squad, activated them for the first 3 weeks, and then got Brett Kern in there. So it helped them from a roster manipulation standpoint to keep players at other positions by having 0 punters on the 53-man roster. I don't think this year around you're going to see something all that crazy, but it's just an example of what it is you can do. All right, so those are basically the rules for the practice squad and the deadlines and everything like that. Let's pause for a moment and hear a word from our friends at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City.
Go to get your game on. Go for the beers. Go for the cheers. Go for the hit and the hits. Go for the stakes and the stakes. Go to get your parlay on. Go to get your party on. Go for the scene. Go for the screens. Go for the gallery. Go for the win. Go to Ocean. Visit theoceanac.com to plan your visit.
All right, just want to really quickly thank a lot of our influx of Patreon members over the last week or two. Everybody is really excited. We will soon have an announcement on our first Ask an Eagle live stream where people can jump in and ask former Eagles coach, player, or exec a question and get it answered. So we're working on that. We should have an announcement soon. Really excited about it because I think we're going to really get a good one. Also wanted to appreciate those who upgraded their memberships. Sam, Keith, Joe, Andrew, for example. We have new members, Russell and Marvin, and everybody will be able to participate in the next live stream Wednesday, 8 p.m. And that will probably be a very active one because that'll be about a day after all the roster moves in the practice squad. And I'm sure people have a lot of great questions that's in our Ask ITB live stream for our Patreon members. And again, to get in, that's patreon.com/InsideTheBirds. All right, so let's start off with projecting the offensive roster. And I know I feel this way. I think Adam does too. Andrew, I saw yours. I think we're close. I tilted my 53-man a little bit heavier on defense than offense. And I think we're all on agreement. No need to really get into the whole quarterback situation that the Eagles are going to keep 3 quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts, Kenny Pickett, Tanner McKee. The only question is here is I don't know, does somebody pick up the phone, call Howie, try to get Pickett? I don't see that happening, but I know that that's been out there. So I just wanted to address it. I believe you go in with these 3 quarterbacks. Adam, any reason to think otherwise?
No, I think this is, kind of simple. The Eagles are into developing quarterbacks. That's why Tanner McKee is on the roster. We know we got some work with the twos this summer. He's been a nice story of development as a 6th-round pick, and they'll continue to work with him.
I think people might think that something's going to happen because of a couple of years ago when the Eagles had Flacco as Wentz's backup and they drafted Hurts, and Hurts was having a nice enough camp, and then they dealt Flacco to make Hurts the number 2. So I think people see some sort of similarity here where Tanner McKee has looked good. So why not deal Kenny Pickett and just make McKee the number 2? I think that's a little bit of it's not apples to apples. I can understand, Andrew, how somebody would make that sort of leap, but I don't see that happening.
No, I mean, I've always cautioned, pump the brakes a little bit with Tanner McKee. Yeah, context is really important when you're looking at the preseason. It's going against 3rd teamers. In practice, he hasn't, at least in the latter stages of training camp, he didn't look particularly sharp. He threw a couple pick sixes actually towards the end of camp. And I think he performs better in the games, but I think he's still a year away from being that quarterback 2. If the Eagles needed someone to get you through a game or 2, I think Kenny Pickett gives you obviously the better option. He started 24 games in the NFL. So I think that's kind of a no-brainer.
All right, so 3 quarterbacks. Let's move on to running back. I think this one was pretty cut and dried too. You're going to keep 3 running backs this year. Saquon Barkley, Kenneth Gainwell, and the rookie Will Shipley. Did either of you give any kind of thought as to them keeping Ty Davis-Price as a 4th? I did not, but he certainly had a decent preseason. Adam?
I had him on the practice squad.
Go ahead, Andrew. Sorry.
I had him on the practice squad, yeah.
Okay. Because, he's subject to waivers. Yeah, that's exactly where I see him. I didn't think twice about the first 2 positions. Receiver, though, that's fascinating. I'm interested to see where you guys go at receiver.
Yeah, so receiver, I think we're actually all on the same board. It's just, we all have the same 6, right? It's just the way I did my 53 was I put down the players that I think are definitely locks to make the team. And then I see how much I have left. All right, I got 10 players left that can make, and then I start to go different positions and say, who do I think earned it and deserved it, or who was drafted and clearly probably not going to get cut, right? So a guy like Aniyah Smith to me made the team. Johnny Wilson made the team. We all have the same 6. It's AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and Jahan Dotson, and then the 3 reserves are Covey, Aniyah Smith, and Johnny Wilson. I debated a little bit on Covey, but in the end, I felt good punt returner, and I just think that he showed enough this year that he deserved. The other 2 guys are no debate because they're draft picks, and I didn't see the Eagles cutting them, especially because Wilson was running with the first team for as long as he was, and Aniyah Smith seemed to come on at the end of camp.
By the way, Covey didn't dress yesterday, so that's kind of an indication that he's locked. Yeah. He's had a really good camp, and this is actually going to be the first year, at least in my estimation, that he's going to make the team outright. If you remember, the first couple of seasons he was cut, then they brought him back on the practice squad, they elevated him, and then they finally signed him. Well, if they were to do that this year, they're not going to get him back. There will be teams that go after him. Johnny Wilson, I know that, if you want to get creative, you could try to put him on IR, not with a concussion. I think he's going to be ready to go. Aniyah Smith, 5th-round pick. I don't see the Eagles parting ways with him. And I also don't think he would make it through waivers. There's going to be, all it takes is one team to be interested and like him through the draft process, claim him, and then maybe they think that they could develop him. And I think he came on a little bit during camp.
So it's interesting, Adam, before you make your point, because you and I had a discussion about draft picks and Howie Roseman's history. And there's a perception that he doesn't cut his draft picks. And I think if you look at the more recent history, that's a very fair perception. But over time, you came up with 6 players, right?
Yes.
That he drafted that he cut that year. Do you want to go through them really quickly?
Yeah. So Howie's first year of full personnel control, where he wasn't sharing anything, was 2016. Obviously, we know what happened in 2015. He was re-signed. Chip Kelly fired, and he gets everything back. So he's had full personnel control since 16. Here are the 6. Alex McAllister, who we knew would never make it. He was too thin. He was a 7th rounder in 2016 out of Florida. He was cut. Now, this one was interesting because he would later come back. In fact, I think he wound up being traded. There was a transaction. Blake Countess was the safety / corner and returner, who would later play for the Rams. In the same draft in 2016, he was a 6th rounder. He was cut initially. Then you go, now this one, boy, I had a bet. I lost this one in 2019. I didn't think Howie would cut a quarterback. He did, Clayton Thorson. Matter of fact, if you remember, after you passed through waivers on claim, he refused to sign with the Eagles practice squad. He went to Dallas, and Peterson had to answer that, if you recall, that in the press conference. He was kind of annoyed by that. And now go to 2020. This guy wound up making it. Surprisingly, Casey Tuhal was cut, and he wound up playing for Washington for a while. And Prince Tegawanago would be cut, go to the Eagles practice squad, then leave and go to Kansas City. And then the last one, this guy wound up, I don't believe he ever wound up playing for the Eagles, or maybe he went to the practice squad, but he was definitely cut. Jacoby Stevens was a safety out of LSU who got moved to linebacker in 2021. The last draft pick that was cut before the season start was Jacoby Stevens.
Right. So here, not only do you see a variety of positions, you mentioned 2 pass rushers, right? A linebacker, 2 safeties, and an offensive tackle. So he's not afraid to cut a premier position, tackle and quarterback, pass rusher, 6 guys. And honestly, Thorson was a 4th round pick.
Fifth.
I'm sorry, 5th round pick. Right. So anywhere from 5, 6, 7, you're vulnerable. But as we bring it back to wide receiver, I didn't think that Ainias Smith was so horrible. I mean, he actually wound up improving as camp went on, that they're gonna take this chance and not keep him.
Yeah, on that. So the last 2 weeks put him on the roster for me. It was tight. I mean, the drops, Andrew, and we'll throw it to Andrew in a second. Andrew, you saw those drops he had, and checked in with a scouting source, a guy who was an area scout for a team, and said he did not have this problem in college. And this guy said he's so tough. He could return on specials. You could use him as a gadget player. Very interesting player, well built. But Andrew, was it concentration drops? What kind of drops do you think he had in training camp from your eyes?
Concentration drops, and I think he just started to lose confidence, Adam. When I did speak to him after the Baltimore Ravens preseason game, and he did acknowledge that he was working through the stress fracture, and it was more of an issue than than a lot of folks initially expected. But he's starting to round into form. I think when you start to make plays, he had that 2-point conversion. When you start to make plays, you start to stack productive days, then you start to build your confidence. And I think you started to see that. Didn't have any exceptional plays. I think he had a nice fingertip catch towards the end of training camp, maybe the second or last day. But that's really what he needed to move forward. He's fielding punts cleanly, which sounds simple enough, but early in the spring and in training camp, he was muffing them. He was a little clunky, but I think he's looked a lot more polished in that area. So I've been encouraged with what I've seen from him.
All right, good stuff there. So we are all basically in agreement for the first 3 spots here: quarterback, running back, and wide receiver, and that brings us to 12 players kept so far. So let's get into our first and only disagreement here, and it really is over tight end and offensive line, and it's really about 2 players in particular. For tight end, you guys both went with 2. You obviously, Dallas Goedert is your starter, Grant Calcaterra backup. After a lot of deliberation, all right, and I should add, you guys went with 2 tight ends and 10 offensive linemen. After a lot of deliberation, I went with 3 tight ends and 9 offensive linemen.
Oh, okay.
I kept EJ Jenkins.
That's it. Yep.
I did not keep Brett Toth. I think you guys both did.
No, I didn't. I kept Kennard.
I kept Kennard too, but then there must have been.
And Dylan McMahon.
Oh, all right. You kept McMahon, and Adam, you kept which one?
I released McMahon.
You kept Toth.
I kept Toth. Here's my thinking. Thinking. McMahon is a 1-position player. He's not a guard. He's not strong enough. He's very small.
Yeah.
Toth has 5-position versatility. He could play center, obviously. No, we could debate. I didn't say how good he was. I just said he could play that.
I was just about to say.
Yeah, I know.
It's your favorite expression, Adam. Depth isn't how much you can do. Yeah. It's can you play?
Yeah, well, it's a quality, but not quantity. But he does, and this has been a Jeff Stoutland special. They keep bringing him back. His center snaps have gotten better. Not a great player, but Dylan, let's see, here's the question. Let's just, because Matt Hennessy has been a disappointment. I mean, I know he's hurt right now.
Yeah, none of us had him making it.
He didn't become the player I think we all thought he would be. So if you cut Toth, are you really telling me that Dylan McMahon is ready to be the backup center? I say no.
Well, I would also say that Trevor Keegan can play center. There are, you could also, if you put Toth on the practice squad, you put maybe someone like Nick Gates on the practice squad, you can elevate
Yep.
them.
Yep.
And who knows what happens with Matt Hennessy? Maybe if he goes, whether it's IR, whether they part ways with him and he comes back, they have options. But I just don't think that they want to part ways with Dylan McMahon, the 6th-round pick, who, by the way, did show some encouraging signs of development throughout camp. Played all 63 snaps on Saturday. Played 81% of the snaps the second game. So he's gotten a lot of reps, and I think that's really what he needed to get stronger and know how to play the position at the pro level. I just think that there's more upside there than Brett Toth, who I think Brett Toth can. I don't think there's going to be any teams clamoring for his services.
No, he's actually, and he's vested. So yeah, he wouldn't have to go through waivers, believe it or not. But see, to me though, with McMahon, he is so small. I just, again, if you're going to cut Toth and say now Keegan really is a left guard.
He can play right too. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point he has to get in there.
Scouting people we talked to, he just doesn't have it in his background. Maybe he will.
Well, that's where Stelton comes in, because the same thing with Sua Opeta. He could not play right guard.
It took him
3 years
later
later
on, right? That's true. Later on in his career.
Yeah, because what I was told on Keegan is he can play all interior positions.
Right.
At some point, maybe.
But to kind of circle back to your tight end point, Geoff, what prompted you to go with EJ Jenkins? Because were you impressed with them, or do you feel like they need to carry 3? Like, what was your thought process?
So my process is, what do they want? What do I think that they could keep on the practice squad and have active for week 1 versus what do I think they definitely need to have for the season? And Grant Calcaterra is not a blocker. He's been hurt very much, and Dallas Goedert gets hurt too. And they could get hurt within the season opener, right? So do the Eagles want to put Jenkins on the practice squad and immediately get rid of 3 weeks of activation before they have to make a decision? Or do they just want the security of it, not want to lose a 6'6", 260-pound guy who can block at that position and has tape that showed it and made some decent catches? I mean, obviously, I think he could have done better in the passing game, but did not. Or do they want to keep him and then figure that they can get McMahon and Toth and Gates back? And to me, it became a numbers. Like, you could get all 3 of those centers, have them on your practice squad, and literally get 9 weeks worth of activation if you need a backup center. But so really, and I agree with you. I feel like from a positional value standpoint, you go offensive line over tight end all the time. But when you have 3 guys in your camp who can all do it, one of them's a 6th-round pick who only plays one position versus you're really razor thin right now at tight end. And this kid you've developed and showed you something. Could you get him onto the practice squad? Maybe. But if you lost him compared to losing one of those other 3, if I lose one of those other 3 centers, I got 2 others, right? If I lose EJ Jenkins, then I got to go I'm bringing back Uzama, who didn't look like he had a whole lot. I would just take my chances with Jenkins and know that I have 3 different centers that can come back to the practice squad, at least 2 of them, and get 6 weeks of activation out of them.
So as I was crunching the numbers and kind of assessing practice and going through my notes, I didn't view EJ Jenkins as one of the top 53 players. So I didn't want to keep 3 tight ends on my 53 just for the sake of doing so, especially when you could keep him on your practice squad. You can put an Albert Okwuegbunam on the practice squad. And by the way, there's another layer to this. Perhaps Jack Stoll maybe shakes free.
Oh,
great point.
Who has a lot of blocking ability. We know that he can block a little bit, and maybe if he happens to be on the outs with the Giants, maybe he's a familiar face that they have some interest in.
Yeah, you know why, Andrew? Good point, because Chris Manhertz, who's in the NFL because he's a wide tight end, he's really a good blocker, and Denver cut him. I don't know if because Jack thought he was going to have a better opportunity, but remember they drafted Theo Johnson, they signed Manhertz. So yeah, he if he could become free, remember he was the backup not only to Goddard, but he was really a wide tight end. That's a good thought. We'll see. Now he was not cut Sunday. The Giants cut 10 players on Sunday. He was not one of them. So we'll see what happens today.
So the only other thing I'll add to that, because I think these are all great points, is if they do keep 10 offensive linemen and only 2 tight ends, I would think that the 10th would be McMahon, because generally when the Eagles keep 10, that 10th is a young developmental guy, like a Josh Sills. Right. In the past, it's been a name. Who was it? Was it Owosika? Didn't they keep Owosika one year?
I don't think he made it outright.
Jack Anderson, right?
Yeah. Jack Anderson.
Okay. Yeah. I don't think it'll be Toth. I don't consider him young and developmental anymore. And I don't think, obviously,
sure,
wouldn't be Nick Gates. He's not young and developmental. So if I were to change mine and take Jenkins off, I would probably put McMahon on.
Yeah, I would say that's the one I struggled with. This is the first one. Receiver, we'll see if we're right on Nye Smith, but I think he came on late enough that I didn't debate that one much. But this is where I first started EJ Jenkins. I really wanted to keep him. But then where am I going? Because this is the talks with personnel people. It's like, okay, if we're going to go heavier here, where are we going thinner?
Right.
And that's that. And after the Eagles kept 7 defensive tackles to start the season last year, that's where you never really know what Howie's thinking, because that's other teams are like, what is he doing? I remember getting that from other teams. Like, what makes no sense? But never know.
When we get further down the line here, I'll tell you, it was between, for me, Nia Smith and another player when we get to it.
Okay.
Cool. Good stuff. Good parlay as we I can round it out by saying we're all like-minded in that we kept 24 offensive players there, and really just a one position discrepancy for offense. So now we will go on to the defensive side. Before we get to the defensive part of our 53-man roster projection, I got to make this remark. The college football season has already started with a bang as number 10 Florida State goes down to Georgia Tech. I believe it's called, this is Andrew's department, the Aer Lingus College Football Classic that occurred. And what a name, the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. But yeah, listen, big upset. A lot of people, I'm sure, were on hand down in Georgia Tech to watch that game between the Yellow Jackets and the Seminoles. And I bet you a lot of people got great tickets for that game, like they can any college football game, using the Game Time app. We've been telling you about the new feature. It's called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier, because it filters out all the fluff to show you only the great deals on the great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They've got what you call the super deal and the amazing deal. What it is, fellas, is it may not be the least expensive ticket in the arena. That's not a great deal. It's the least expensive ticket in a row where you would ordinarily expect to pay more. So it's really all about value. And Game Time does a great job of finding the best value in every zone. And, you know, I've used it to find great value. I'm going to be going up to Penn State UCLA this year, the stripe out game. Got my tickets through Game Time. And of course, Phillies playoffs, Eagles season coming up. Great comedy acts. Still, you can go down to Atlantic City or anywhere nearby and see some great comedy shows, some great concerts. And you can use the Game Time app to find tickets for all of them. The best part of the Game Time app for me, it's getting to view the seat before you buy. I love knowing where I'm going to be sitting and what the view will look like, especially if I'm at a sporting event. And of course, there's the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time credits you 110% of the difference. Remember, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. They've got the event cancellation protection and job loss protection. It all comes with using the Game Time app. So take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Game Time, or sporting event tickets, or concert tickets, theater tickets, anything else. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code BIRDS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code BIRDS, BIRDS, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back to our 53-man roster projection, and 26 defensive players for the Eagles. And what we will do is start up front as we is that correct? 26? Yeah, 26, 24 would be 50, and then the 3 specialists. So 26 on defense. Let's start with the defensive line, the interior defensive line, which I believe, as I'm looking here, yep, we all are in agreement that the Eagles are going to go with 6 here, and I believe we all have the same 6.
Can we go back to hang on? Can we go back to offensive line? Because what is your? I didn't hear what your. I have 10. Who's?
I kept Kennard. I'm sorry, I didn't. I kept my 5 backups were Keegan, Fred Johnson, Steen, Kennard, and wait, I'm sorry, I kept 9 and 1 extra tight end. So those were my 4 backups.
Okay, so I've got 10. Lane, Mailata, Darren Kennard, Mr. Right Tackle, who seems to play like every snap.
Yeah.
Fred Johnson, of course. Dickerson, of course. Becton, Steen, Keegan, Jurgensen, Toth. Now, the question, Andrew, is where do you differ here on their offensive line?
I have McMahon and I have Kennard. Those are the two
Gotcha.
differences. I think Darian Kennard being able to play right guard, especially when you look at the Tyler Steen injury situation. Now, I did see Tyler Steen coming off the field yesterday, walking through the tunnel, and I did see him on the sideline during that last practice. So I don't know what the extent of it. We'll have to wait and see on that, but you don't know. So there's an unknown. And then you also don't know about Trevor Keegan. So I think having that interior depth who can also play right tackle for you and is younger, who would be more apt to be claimed potentially off waivers was where my thought process went.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think Kennard is basically your Jack Driscoll now, your backup right guard, right tackle. And Steen can be for as long as he's not a starter, he can be your Sua Opeta who can play right guard, left guard. He actually can play some tackle too because he played it at Alabama.
Of course.
Yeah. All right, so we will move on to then the defensive line where the interior, we all kept 6. Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, your top 3. Moro Ojomo had a great camp. He's in. Marlon Tuipulotu makes it, right, because he's literally the only backup that can play nose. So you need that. It was going to be him and PJ Mustipher, but Tuipulotu I thought had a pretty decent camp.
Actually, Booker's played nose before.
Booker can. He said
he can. He doesn't really have the ideal nose. I feel like he showed this camp that he's a good backup 3 technique. He gives you more burst.
I agree. I agree with you. No doubt.
And that's why we all put him on. Athlete. We thought Booker was going to make it.
Yeah, he's a better athlete. But nice story. Really nice story that he came on. Now, again, you don't know about backups until they have to play. So Jomo had a really good camp. Like he was the first guy off the bench entire training camp. The question is, Andrew, do we trust Thomas Booker if he had to play? Because it's a great story, former Texan draftee. What are your thoughts on Booker this summer?
You see the dominance in one-on-ones, his ability to play with leverage, his power, his burst. And I think you see it translate into actual scrimmage situations. He manhandled Brett Toth. He gave the interior fits during scrimmage. I remember he tossed him aside, wrapped up Saquon on a play. He disrupted 3 plays in a row. But it's one thing to do it in practice, Adam, as you know, but then it's another thing to be able to correlate that into production on the field. And he did that. So I think what I've seen, everything that he's been asked to do, he's checked off those boxes. So I think you have to be encouraged with what he can do for you. He's also a lot more athletic than someone like a Marlon Tuipulotu. Yep. And he said it when I spoke to him after the game on Saturday. I think when you're in your 3rd season, things start to click. You start to hit your stride, and you're seeing it.
So my philosophy on that is always when a guy dominates in camp practices and preseason games, and he's a running back, I don't pay it much credence. And he's a linebacker, I don't pay it much credence, right? Because we've all seen the Henry Josies, the Lorenzo Bookers, the Chris McCoy. Like, we've seen that before. When it's a defensive lineman, specifically an interior one, like a Hassan Ridgeway or a Travion Hester.
Trayvon Mullen? Hester.
Hester made the team, right? He had a really good as a defensive end.
Double doink.
Yes, right? Yeah. So when a guy like Booker does what he does and plays a position that the Eagles really value, and when Vic Fangio says, listen, I'm not comfortable unless we keep at least 6 to 7 guys, to me, we'll see what happens, but I felt that you had to put Booker on for all 3 of them.
And remember, you've got a 60-man practice squad. You see what the waiver wire looks like. You see what kind of veterans are out there. You put 1 or 2 on the practice squad if that would make a lot of sense. But it's a good story with Thomas Booker, who was on the practice squad all of last season. And one thing before we move on to the edge rusher group is that let's not forget, before Tuipulotu got hurt 2 years ago during their Super Bowl run, he was actually doing really well. He really improved, and then he had an injury. But man, so this guy has shown that he could play a little bit.
Andrew, in that preseason game against the Vikings, Tuipulotu played. Somebody had a sack. I don't remember who it was in the second quarter or a major pressure, but it was really
it was Thomas Booker.
Yes, but it was Tuipulotu who pushed the pocket and made the court. I saw some really good power and bull rush out of Tuipulotu. I thought all camp he's looked strong.
Yeah, I thought we much has been made about the interior depth. And I think that all you can ask for is to see some sort of promise from that group. And you really did throughout the summer. physical. They were being disruptive. They were getting into the backfield, and then like I said, you see it translate onto the game field, and that's really what you're looking for if you're Vic Fangio. He did make a note. He said, to keep an extra lineman, you don't want to. You can't just keep a backup nose, somebody who can strictly only play nose, which is kind of a tell because Thomas Booker can play in multiple positions, which is I noted that in my 53-man roster story.
Yeah, the play I'm thinking of, I think, was Okwara though, who had the sack because Tuipulotu had pushed the pocket toward him. Okwara had a decent game there.
He had a nice game, and you know what? He got a lot of pressure late in camp, so good. Yeah. I think he'd be a good practice squad guy, perhaps.
Yeah, so that'll translate into our next conversation on the edges, as we all agreed on the 6 interior defensive linemen. We're all in agreement on 6 edges making it. Bryce Huff, Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, Brandon Graham, the 3rd rounder, Jalix Hunt. And the only question I think we all had going into camp was, could Okwara make it as a 6 or a Terrell Lewis, or would Patrick Johnson, because of his great special teams prowess, be able to outlast them? And not only did Patrick Johnson outlast them in our projections, but he also himself performed really well as an edge rusher. Andrew, you wrote about this. This guy added 10 pounds. What was
10
it?
pounds of lean muscle mass. Yeah.
Yeah. And he worked with former Eagles. I love this guy. Former Eagles defensive line coach Pete Jenkins, who was here for about 1 year, cup of coffee under Chip Kelly. Real Cajun guy from New Orleans, like totally fish out of water being here in Philly, but was a really cool guy and definitely a well-respected college pass rusher who had a little bit of experience there in the NFL. But I know Patrick Johnson worked with him a lot in the offseason.
Yeah, he worked with him for a couple of weeks this offseason. He's worked with him in the past out in Texas. And you really see the physicality, the power at the point of attack that he really didn't necessarily have. He was an undersized edge rusher over the past few years, and now going into his 4th season, I think what you're seeing is someone who can give you a lot more potentially than what he's given you on special teams even. So when you couple that with the new kickoff rule and his impact of being able to cover kicks, I think for me, it was a no-brainer to keep him on as the 6th edge rusher.
Adam, did you have any reluctance on Patrick Johnson as your number 6?
No, but I would go to the start of training camp where I thought he was clearly on the bubble. He's really been a special teams player only.
Right.
And then, boy, he took his game to another level. Andrew just outlined some of the reasons, and it's been a good story. And boy, what a value he's been as a 7th round pick. They've done they've gotten a lot out of that guy, no question.
100%. I get major Steven Means vibes from him. I tweeted that once. Everybody who remembers Steven Means from the Super Bowl team knows, like, this guy was just hair on fire in practice, in games, on special teams.
Brian Brayman.
Yeah, him too. But yeah, there was something about Steven Means where everybody seemed to love him and really gravitate around him. And I think that Patrick Johnson has similar traits.
Steven Means business. Remember that?
Business.
He was this guy got paid as a special teams player. He was one of the best special teams players of his day, no doubt.
There you go. All right, special teams is going to be a big theme coming into our next position as we move to inside linebacker. I can't believe we're all in agreement with it. I mean, I can because we've talked about this, but if you would have told any of us going into camp that the Eagles were going to come out of camp keeping 5 inside linebackers and none of them being Oren Burks, we would have been like, you're crazy. But we all have the same 5 inside linebackers: Devin White, Zach Baun, Nakobe Dean, Jeremiah Trotter, and Ben Van Sumeren. Obviously Van Sumeren with the special teams acumen there. And I wonder if, Adam, Burks being hurt for most of camp made it easy for the Eagles to try to get him through and back to the practice squad. Because I feel like the way he played, the way he showed you what he can do, even in that little preseason game that he didn't need to play but did, he's a pretty good backup linebacker.
He is.
I think if he had been healthy,
he did not belong in that game. He's
not at all.
I know.
If he was healthy, they would have had a much more difficult decision to make, I think.
Because remember, he's long. He's been a starter in this league. Burks is not subject to waivers, so it's a situation where if he is released, they could work it out with Steve Carrick's agent and say, hey, you want a chance to not only go to the playoffs, let's face it, Baun, White. Look, Zach Baun probably will start week 1, though Dean is really pushing. But they've got very little consistent play from the inside backers. Who says that if Burks comes back, that he couldn't start later in the season?
That's correct. This is the position, though, that I just, even though we're all in agreement, I'm not sold myself. Like, I still feel like Oren Burks might make this 53
Well,
somehow, and somebody else won't.
Do you think
Here's
they're
the
going to
thing.
carry 6 or 5?
No. I don't,
You mean
they're
over
not
Van
doing
Sumeren?
this.
Over Van Sumeren?
Maybe,
I think Van
or
Sumeren.
there's a surprise move that I just can't figure out. Like, I don't know what it would be, but there's always a surprise move.
Well, Van Sumeren, before we move on, let's talk about him for a minute. This guy has been a really nice story of development, right? Really good special teams player. We know he's the best athlete at inside backer. Had phenomenal. He started one game as an NFL player, and the tape was phenomenal against the Giants in the regular season. That, to me, alone is why you at least want to try to develop this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And why not? When the group, remember now, White, 1-year deal, Bond, one-year deal, Burks, 1-year deal, Dean, the third year of his 4-year deal. Why not try to develop someone just like they developed another former undrafted free agent in TJ Edwards?
100%.
I think the Eagles really like Ben Van Sumeren. And when you see it, you can't help but notice the explosiveness, the speed. He runs a 4.4. He plays with violence, like his hair is on fire. I mean, all those certain traits, they really translate into being someone who I think you can depend on defensively. And that all ties into his advanced instincts. I had a chance to talk to him Saturday after the game, and he just seems like he's in a really good place with that defense. He's playing faster, he said, instinctually, but also his eyes got a lot better for playing that position.
Didn't you report last year, Adam, like right around this time, that if Van Sumeren was gonna get cut, that there would definitely be a team or two that claimed him?
Yeah, well, what happened was one team told me that they had a real issue because he is so raw. He was raw coming into the season as a inside backer.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't justify claiming him just to play special teams. Whatever special teams tape he put out last summer is really good from preseason, but it's hard to just claim a special teams player, and that was their one issue. But they thought, had he become free, basically. Remember, he was waived. He was waived initially, and then he went to Eagles practice squad. But they just thought that he's a practice squad guy. Really, they thought last year he was a practice squad player, and they didn't want to claim him. But then, obviously he had it worked out with his agent, and this has been a really good story. I'm glad for the Eagles have stuck by the kid. It's a good job of scouting. This kid can play.
Yeah. So think about it. If some team might have even claimed him last year, it's a year later. He actually played last year against the Giants, played fairly decently for a
really
kid.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. And then has had pretty good tape this spring. So it's hard to think that you could just easily, bring him back to your practice squad when his name is already out there and he has decent tape. So that would be our 5 inside linebackers. That gives us 17 so far on on defense. And again, we all have 26. That gives us 9 for the back end in the secondary, which we'll get to in a second. We'll pause real quick to hear a word from our friends at Sky Motor Cars.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schiller, make sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
And if you stop into Sky Motor Cars out there in Westchester, PA, make sure to tell them that Adam and Geoff sent you. You'll get a great deal. If not, just hit them up at SkyMotorCars.com. All right. I looked at everything that we did in the back end, and surprisingly, we are all in agreement on the 9 on the back. I don't know if that's
Really
a surprise or not. Yeah, but we both kept 5 corners, 4 safeties. I thought I might be on an island no, actually there is a little bit of a difference.
All right, let's do it.
All right. So let's start with corner. I think that we're all similar there. Corner, we each kept Darius Slay, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Isaiah Rodgers, and Keely Ringo. Correct? That's everybody's 5 corners.
What I've got. Yep.
All right. So really the only discussion there was Eli Ricks and Josh Jobe. Jobe has been a very good special teamer, but we've already kept now a bunch of guys for special teams.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Andrew made this point in his 53-man, and you just talked about it with Ben Van Sumeren and that team that had concerns. You want to keep guys who are good in special teams, but they also have to be playable if they need to get in there.
Yeah.
I don't know and Andrew made this point to me, I don't know if Josh Jobe is playable anymore. He looked like a guy who lost a lot of confidence when he had to play cornerback.
Well, you heard what Vic said when I asked him about Eli and Josh having played a lot of snaps last season, where did they stand in their development? And he said Eli's had a good camp. Well, Josh has had some good reps, but we got to cut down on his penalties. He's getting too many PI calls, and we got to rectify that. And that's really what you see out there. Even in one-on-ones, he's grabby. He's getting flagged in practice. He's getting flagged in the games. He got in one play last year against the Seahawks. He grabs DK Metcalf. They take him right off the field. So he just seemed to have fallen out of favor. I know if Michael Clay had his choice of one player that he could keep, I'm almost positive it would be Josh Jobe. That's the first player he mentions every time he talks about impact players for his unit. But the hardest one for me, I was torn between Eli Ricks and Anais Smith. And Eli has the coverage acumen. He's young. He's 22. He has that pedigree. But I just did not think he was consistent enough to warrant sticking around the roster. He's also not a dominant special teams player. So I went with the 5th round pick in Anais Smith.
So on that discussion on Ricks, I thought it was interesting because, it was a big surprise last year. Well, as soon as this new staff came in, he's more or less demoted. I mean, Rodgers was over him, Ringo was over him, and it's just going to be hard for him. He just doesn't run as well as those other guys. To me, you got to be able to run. I mean, I give the guy credit. He did a great job last year under the circumstances. Couldn't ask for much more out of him. But these other guys that come in, Ringo's improvement, who looks like he's got a chance to be a quality backup. Rodgers has been a very good story so far, and Mitchell obviously is well on his way based on what happened. And DeJean's obviously is going to have his role. And again, we're calling him either nickel or a corner. So there's just not enough. I just don't see them keeping 6 outside corners.
I'm with you guys on. I think the 5 are the 5, and they'll make up on special teams and other positions what they might lose out of Josh Jobe, who has been very good. I think he was on the Pro Bowl ballot for the position last year.
I'm a Josh Jobe guy, man. I got to know him, and I think that you see the impact that he has in the third phase, but it's just really tough. Like, I don't know that you can qualify him as a top 53 player.
Correct. So let's move on to our 4 safeties. We both all have 4 safeties. That rounds it out. That gives us 50 overall players, and then your 3 specialists, your kicker, punter, and long snapper. You 2 went with CJ Gardner-Johnson, Reed Blankenship, Avonte Maddox, and Tristan McCullum. Do I have that correct for both of you? I believe.
Correct.
All right. I cut Avonte and kept Andre Sam.
Whoa!
Nice.
Whoa!
Nice.
Because I believe Maddox will actually be on the active roster for week 1. He'll be called up from the practice squad for depth. But I cannot justify, if I'm young, developmental, if I need a young athletic, I got to keep Andre Sam and McCullum and just feel like I can get Maddox back on my practice squad. That's the only difference.
I like that because Andre Sam, Jeff, and I've written about him in my observations. You started to notice him later in training camp getting more reps. In fact, there were times where I noticed him more than I noticed Tristan McCullum. Mm-hmm. And I do think that if Andre Sam does not make the 53, I think he will be elevated at some point and be on the roster. Played 92 snaps total in that on Saturday. And I thought he did some good things, very aggressive coming downhill. And I think if you're the Eagles, you have to be impressed with what you've got. This is the first time since 2020 that I don't have an undrafted free agent, and the Eagles probably won't, making the roster. But we'll have
that
to
was also under my consideration, is that they would not have any undrafted free agents if I didn't keep Andre Sam, and they always at least have one.
If they were to keep one, it would be Andre Sam.
Adam?
Yeah, look, the thing with McCollum, he's got length, which you like. He really improved this preseason and I'm talking more really training camp. And they've stuck by him. And he's a good special teams player, which has a lot of value. And by the way, we should mention Sidney Brown. Now, the thing with him is everyone around there feels like he looks good and with all the rehab and stuff, but he still hasn't practiced yet. Mm-hmm. Now, PUP rules have changed. It's no longer 6 games; it's 4 that you would have to miss. At this point, why not give him 3 or 4 more weeks? But we'll see what they do. Because remember now, in season PUP. You don't count against the roster where you do in the preseason.
So if he starts off on PUP, he has to be out for how long now?
4 games, not
4
weeks,
games.
it's games.
Right.
And you don't count.
I think you're right. I think you can get by, and it's worth it.
Yeah.
To not rush him. Yeah. Now, go ahead.
I was going to say McCollum's been one of the better camp stories. I think he's been really consistent throughout. He's performed well in the games. For special teams, you could say not having Josh Joe, what do you do at gunner? Because that's where he's really impactful. Well, Tristan McCollum can do that. Keely Ringo can do that. Cooper DeJean can do that. I think they really are impressed with what they saw from Tristan McCollum in terms of processing. The game really slowed down for him. That's one of the first things he mentioned to me about what really clicked for him this summer. He took some of the things that didn't work for him in training camp in past years and tried to reconfigure his plan. And he talked about how much Joe Casper and Christian Parker really helped him in his progression.
Awesome. Good stuff. So there's one conversation left to be had before we get out of here really quickly.
Okay.
The only thing that could really, I mean, there's a lot of things that can threaten the legitimacy of this 53. And again, this is just the initial 53. It might look completely different after waiver wire cut down and additions, which we expect that will always happen. And then even different again before the opening night against Green Bay. But the one conversation we have to have is that James Bradbury did not make any of our 53s, but he has a very large contract. And do the Eagles cut him outright, Adam, or we all think they find somebody that forks over like a 6th rounder just to.
I don't agree with that.
You don't think so?
No, I'd be stunned. I mean, I guess there's always surprises. That would be surprising if it.
Why would it be? Because the money is going to drain to the Eagle. Whoever claims him is not getting a whole lot.
No, there's no
money,
claim.
right?
There's no claim.
Whoever takes on the contract. I mean,
yeah,
in a trade.
There would be an offset on it, but yeah, it's a lot of money to. He's got he actually the option bonuses, though they owe him the money, it actually vests. They have to make a decision by the week 1, which is coming up here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just an interesting situation. Boy, he did look like he could probably make it at safety. Then he had the one issue in the game, and people beat him up over it. And then the Andrew, what did you think of him not playing?
So I took it one of two ways, Adam. It could be that the Eagles were trying to preserve him and prevent injury, and in case they wanted to try and move him.
Mm-hmm.
But Nick Sirianni said that he saw enough out of him, which is baffling a little bit because 4th safeties on any roster across the NFL, they play the bulk of the preseason snaps, especially for a player who is very far into that position. I just thought that was kind of curious. I don't see a world where he's on this roster. I could be wrong here, but I just if you're the 3rd safety or even 4th safety, you don't play special teams. I don't know how you can justify that as an active game day, position.
Let me bring it back to that option bonus that you said is due by week 1, right, Adam?
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of money. They owe it to him. It's fully guaranteed. It's just a matter of, for cap purposes, it prorates.
I wonder if even if he was traded, the Eagles would owe that out, or does the team if a team traded for a 6th for him, would they inherit that option bonus to pay? I think that's a big part of the discussion.
Yeah, and obviously it's
because I could see him maybe being on the roster then for a week until that bonus is paid up, and then he's tradable because the team that's trading for him doesn't have to pay that bonus anymore. Which is
they're not going to want to. I mean, obviously, exactly. In fact, there was a team made a trade for a player. I can't remember a team, but I remember looking at the contract, and they made the team that had the player pay the roster bonus, which let's say was due the 5th day of free agency. They said, we're not taking that roster bonus. We'll take him the 6th day of free agency. So you have to pay the roster bonus. And what'll happen is to exercise it. Yeah, it's got to be no later than the day prior to the club's first game. That's the language I'm told that was sent to me.
So they could pay it at any time. They could pay it right now.
Yeah,
then trade them the next day and say, "Hey, trading team, you don't have to owe this option, but we paid it." So
right. But the question is, if he is 31, which he turned in August, Andrew just talked about the lack of special teams value. Yes, he could play corner if he needed him to, but remember they said he was going to play corner, Andrew?
He never did.
So at this point, really, how could he help a team? A great guy, by the way, super person.
One of the best. Yeah. One of the best to speak to, highly intelligent. But Adam, we talked about guys like Job not being on the roster. You take someone like McCollum off the roster, who would be let's say the de facto gunner. Bradbury can't do it. I mean, I don't know if you want to put DeJean out. You know what I mean? Like, there's a whole bunch of domino effect to Bradbury being on the roster. But one more question I had for you guys: Caden Stearns. where are we at with him? Because I had him on IR when I filed.
So do I, Andrew. I mean, how do you justify keeping him on the 53? Just work it out with the agent.
Yep.
Because Vic talked about it. He would miss the first week coming back from the patella tendon injury. It's a major injury. It's worse than ACL, really, in terms of rehab. He's not going to be available to contribute anytime soon. Why keep him part of the 53? I know he's Vic's guy.
Claim him?
But...
And why claim him for 2 weeks if you're just going to cut him? Like, I think the path for me the most logical path would be injured reserve.
Yeah, I mean, again, on your point, if he's physically, and don't forget, by the way, Carolina failed him on their physical.
Yeah, right. We always thought that was a move for the future instead of the immediate.
Yeah,
the smart one. Kind of like the Isaiah Rodgers thing, a little bit different, but where you've got an eye on the future and you'll do what you have to do to keep him. All right, good stuff. So if Bradbury's not traded, then he'll probably be on the 53, but it may just be for a little bit before they can make some kind of financial move that would make it easier to trade or cut it.
Yeah, I mean they got to exercise it. They have to. It just for cap purposes, the decision or however it works is before game one. But bottom line is, I just don't see, to round this off here, I just don't see any way he's on the team. Maddox, to me, and I know you don't have him on yours, but I do. I
sort of do, but I don't, because I definitely think he'll be week one on their active roster because he's going to get called up. But yeah.
Well, here's the thing with Sidney Brown's situation. If you're cutting Maddox and then Andre Sam really ready to contribute? To me, I think McCollum makes more sense to be on the roster.
Right. I think McCollum's more ready right now if he had to play some snaps.
Yep.
All right. Well, we shall see. It has been fun. Andrew DiCecco, thank you very much. Adam, always a pleasure. Everybody, you've been listening to Inside the Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles intel. And as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the Birds. Be sure to check out our friends at PHLSportsNation.com. They're enhancing the fans' experience with their coverage of all Philadelphia sports teams. For the fan, by the fan is their motto. So make sure you check them out at PHLSportsNation.com and on Twitter at PHLSportsNation.